I want to bring in my guest, though. She is here. I appreciate her greatly for being here. We're joined with Anna Gay. I believe I'm saying that correctly. Correct me if I'm
Yes,
wrong.
yes,
Guh.
you're
Thank you. Anna Guh.
yes.
Thank you, Anna Guh.
Getting better.
I'm trying. I'm trying. So she's host and reporter at CGTN Radio. She's political commentator, regular contributor on China and mainstream media in South Africa, Sweden, India, and Central Asia countries. And I am happy to have Anna Guh here with me today. How are you doing? You doing okay today?
Yeah, great. Thanks for inviting me. Always happy to chat about this important topic.
Oh man, I'm always so happy to have you. I sent you a. It's astonishing that he would stand there and say it, Scott Benson. I sent you a link to a video of his. Listen to
Yes.
what he says, and I wanted to get your take on this. Before I say anything about it, I want you to give your take on it. So this is him. I don't know where he is, but he's given a presentation, and he's presenting it as if China's model is unsustainable. They have an export model. And we, the US, out of the kindness and goodness of our heart, because we are love and light, we want to help China with that model. We have basically an import model where we, our hamsters on the wheel and we get stuff. And we need China to do something similar out of the kindness of our heart. This is him. You think I'm joking that he said this is exactly what he's saying in this clip. This right here, Scott Benson, US Secretary of Treasury. If I can get to the video, there we are. Okay, let me make this big so everybody can see it.
China in particular, is in need of a rebalancing. Recent data shows the Chinese economy tilting even further away from consumption toward manufacturing. China's economic system, with growth driven by manufacturing exports, will continue to create even more serious imbalances with its trading partners if the status quo is allowed to continue. China's current economic model is built on exporting its way out of its economic troubles. It's an unsustainable model that is not only harming China, but the entire world. China needs to change. The country knows it needs to change. Everyone knows it needs to change, and we want to help it change because we need rebalancing too. China can start by moving its economy away from export overcapacity and towards supporting its own consumers and domestic demand. Such a shift would help with global rebalancing that the world desperately needs.
Can we be clear that this is not an issue of the world needing to rebalance? He is effectively talking about we need to be able to get over on China. This is the man who's been a Soros agent, by the way, that has worked for decades trying to screw over China in order to get the US in a dominant position over China. He's posturing. And I'm saying he's posturing because I can look at the data that's coming out of the US on how bad the economy is doing with Trump's trade war. Give me your take on that statement.
As you said, I think these remarks are ridiculous. At the core of his speech, he implied that today's China or any country with future development potentials should simply give up his right to grow, remain poor, and quietly accept U.S. hegemony. This narrative isn't about economics. Is a disguise or smokescreen because Washington is the one actually facing serious domestic economic troubles and setbacks in its tariff-heavy policy, and again trying to shift the blame abroad to cover its own shortcomings. And China is the easy target. I think this tough talk is just a disguise for its growing sense of insecurity, and you really. Like one comment I saw that under on the X platform saying that you cannot give medicines to others if you cannot cure yourself first. But indeed, China does need economic reform, but not because of the so-called overcapacity in exports, as Mr. Besant suggested. But the real challenge lies in ensuring that China's growth better serve its people and ensuring development is more equitable in the country. China does not need America's help to do that because the drive for reform, such a reform, is internal, and it remains closely connected with a global market that is open, fair, and rule-based. China's economic reform has been ongoing for decades and evolving in response to both societal needs and external changes. Its core target is to let people share in the benefits of development. That logic actually has powered China's rise for over past 40 years. While U.S. media prefers, to hype up China collapse series lately with even greater intensity, but the reality paints a different picture. China's GDP growth by 5.4% in the first quarter of the year. In the key sectors where the U.S. has attempted to block China, such as artificial intelligence, space technology, and semiconductors, progress hasn't stalled in China. It has accelerated. Just look at the DeepSeek's breakthroughs, the manned space flight program, and the ongoing construction of China's space station. Even live streams from influencers like iShowSpeed have shown that the world, what life in China really looks like, that is vibrant, dynamic, and with confidence. So I think China's economy has upgraded naturally through participation in global trade. In the past, China focused on labor-intensive, low-end products like plastics. But today, grain, high-quality, innovative Chinese goods are reaching markets worldwide. It's even leading these sectors. So this transformation is the result of market force, stable domestic environment, and also stable policy and long-term layout, not political manipulation or coercion of others. So I think Mr. Basant answered the wrong question with the wrong solution. The ongoing economic, trade, and technological crackdown by the United States against China is not fair competition, but a strategy of obstruction and containment. These actions aim to deny China and its people the right to development. We know Washington excels at manufacturing issues and shaping agendas. The latest buzzword is overcapacity. It's just another in the long line of manufactured threats like decoupling, de-risking. But serious analysis, including from institutions like Bloomberg and other institutions from the United States, has debunked this such so-called threat. China's new energy industry isn't bloated. It's leading the way because of early investment, robust innovation, and genuine global demand. China's green technology are helping nations facing energy shortages and climate changes. Rather than a threat, they are part of the solution to global crisis, when we're facing climate changes. And framing China's success as a danger is not only misleading, but also dangerous to, for other countries, because you will hinder the development, the green development of developing countries. So this is just a political tool, not an economic fact. So in my opinion, this is not about trade. It's all about power. And I think it's time to call it what it is.
I agree with everything you just said. The notion that the U.S. is, out of the kindness of his heart, wants to help China is outrageous, while simultaneously having a trade war with that same China. It's just insane, right? If you think back to the Soviet Union, when the Soviet Union collapsed, and you get this kind of rampant over capitalism where they just, to use a horrible term, raped that country blind. And you're getting the same thing with Nord Stream, right? You got a comment coming out of Rubio and Rubio and Witkoff, where they admit, look, we're not pulling sanctions away. And the reason why they're not doing it is because they want Europe to use American LNG. So effectively, they're using sanctions as a tool in order to get economic benefit. His issue is that they are terrified that China is out of the horses out the barn, that they can't contain China in a way that they want to. And so he's given this kind of political argument of, we just want to help them. It's overcapacity. It's hurting the world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's nonsense. He has worked for years to screw over China. The testicles on that man. Like, it's just an amazing thing for him to say that. I'm curious. Trump has been saying, and I want you to take on this one too. Donald Trump, they've been at, I don't know if you know what's been happening here, but just as a primer, the dollar has dropped in value about 10%. Donald Trump's ratings and pollings on the economy has plummeted. You have the stock market for the last several weeks have been just dropping like 1,000 points a day. You get businesses saying, like Walmart, Target, et cetera, saying we're going to have empty shelves because of what you are effectively doing. And so Trump, in order to try to stabilize the markets, came out and has been pretending as if he's been having conversations in some capacity with China. Listen to this. Again, when KJ No was on the show, KJ No pointed out he is lying, and yet he continues to lie. If I could pull this up, there we are.
Can you clarify with whom the U.S. is speaking with China? They're saying it's fake news that trade talks are happening.
Well, they had a meeting this morning, so I can't tell you. It doesn't matter who they is. We may reveal it later, but they had meetings this morning, and we've been meeting with China. And so I think you have, Jeff, as usual, I think you have your reporting wrong. Thank you.
Can you clarify with
Okay, is Jeff's reporting wrong? Has China been meeting with Trump behind the scenes in some capacity that Xi Jinping or whatever the press secretary is for China, Wang Yi, just doesn't know about?
You've probably seen the remarks, recent remarks from China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson in response to the US tariff hike. That's the bigger picture I want to lay here. We don't want a trade war, but we are not afraid of one. If the US wants to fight, we'll fight to the end. If it wants to talk, the door is open, but only on the basis of equality and mutual respect. Right. So let's be clear. Washington just unilaterally slapped up to 245% in tariffs on Chinese goods. In contrast, China had already made its position clear back when its tariffs on U.S. goods hit 125%. It said, under such conditions, U.S. exports are U.S. tariffs are simply no longer U.S. exports to China are simply no longer market viable. And if Washington insists on adding more tariffs on Chinese goods, Beijing will simply ignore them. So they are doing that now. That's not escalation. It's just a common sense in the face of economic coercion. So Trump has repeatedly claimed that China keeps reaching out to him. The reality is no trade talks are happening according to the Chinese authorities. So there's zero form of negotiations. And instead of meaningful dialogue, we see a return of old baseless smears, like reviving the conspiracy theory that COVID-19 leaked from a Chinese lab without any new evidence from Washington. This has been a tired tactic to distract from domestic flaws and manipulate public opinion. And if we trace back, Washington's approach to China has always followed the same playbook, create pressure and signal open to talk, and then throw in some disinformation to, shake things up. But the truth is, the White House is running out of cards to play today, and Trump knows it. That's likely why we are now hearing talk from within his team about cutting tariffs on China, not because they suddenly believe in free trade, but because the economic cost of their policies is hitting the United States. Yeah. So let's also be honest. Trump's approach to China has always followed the same playbook, as I said, and I think this kind of tactic is no longer useful for at this point. If you look at the numbers, China actually with the United States, they have a lot of area could expand their cooperation. Their economic relations are fundamentally win-win in the past few decades. For example, the bilateral trade has increased more than 200-fold in the past 40 years since they established the diplomatic relations, with the two-way investment stock reaching 250 billion US dollars. This has created millions of jobs, generated huge tax revenues, and brought real benefits to people on both sides of the Pacific. It has also been a powerful driver of global economic growth. These facts haven't changed. So what changed is the willingness of some, in Washington, the politicians, they refuse to face such a reality. And until they do, I think American families and business will continue to pay the price for a trade war, and that has that should be stopped and could be stopped today.
But Trump's issue is less to do with trade and more to do with the fact that we don't have peers. We don't believe in equals. Mm-hmm. That's not the way we think in this country. The fact that China has been able to pull 800 million people out of poverty, the fact that they've been able to develop magnificently, high-speed rail, skyscrapers, the drones, the technology, and all of this other stuff, the industrial capacity, whereas we deindustrialize. There is a fear in this country that if we are not on top and we are not supremacy of the globe, that we will be under somebody else. It terrifies Trump. It terrifies the neocons in this country. And so this Asian pivot and everything else has more to do with the U.S. maintaining supremacy. The trade war is just another angle of that. I'm curious from your take that when there's a hypothesis that part of the reason that Trump is initiating the trade war is to basically block off China from the U.S. market in preparation for some kind of larger conflict. Does China think that themselves? Like I know China wants win-win relationships, but the U.S. doesn't believe in win-win relationships. We believe in zero sum. We win, you lose. That's the way we think. That's the reason why he started this trade war. He just assumed that he'd be able to win. I'm going to break this into two questions. The first one is going to be, do you see a change as opposed to in the past? Would China have done this 20 years ago? Would they have done this 10 years ago? Where they would effectively stand toe-to-toe and say, we are not budging. No, we're not accepting this.
First of all, that's a very big question, and I think a very good one. First of all, please give me some time. I want to explain how China perceived this trade war. The White House entire approach to tariffs in China, and actually in most of the countries, I think is misguided. I'm not sure if it's a deliberate strategy or just a lack of economic expertise from his team. But either way, it's based on a flawed understanding of trade. The Trump administration has been exaggerating the so-called trade imbalance between the U.S. and other countries. Take China and the U.S., for example. When American officials talk about trade deficit, they are usually referring only to goods, things like electronics or machineries that U.S. imports from China. But they conveniently leave out service trade, because in 2024 last year, the U.S. actually ran a nearly $300 billion US surplus in services trade with China. And in 2022, American companies made a nearly $500 billion US in service sales to China. That's a huge numbers. So the real story from Chinese perspective, China has natural advantages in cost and manufacturing scale, which is why products like smartphones, cars are more affordable when made in China. Meanwhile, the US dominates in high-value services like tech, finance, and the legal consulting. For example, Microsoft Windows, for instance, runs on about 85% of the world's computer. So if we would follow the logic behind the US complaint about trade deficits, should every country now demand a cut of Microsoft profits. Should the world punish America for its 300 billion service surplus? Of course not, because the world doesn't work that way. In reality, the US gets cost-effective goods from abroad and exports high-margin services and tech in return. And many so-called imports from countries like China or Mexico are actually products made for American companies, like iPhones made in China, General Motors cars built in Mexico. So they shown up as foreign exports to the US, but the profits actually flow right back to Apple and General Motors. So what's really going on is that the problem in the United States is not that America is losing in trade, it's that those gains from trade are not being fairly distributed at home. A few sectors and corporations are ranking in record profits, while others, especially workers in traditional manufacturing, are left behind. Slapping tariffs on imports might sound like a quick fix to bring factories back, but it's just a wishful thinking, because there are many roadblocks in the United States. For example, bureaucratic permitting process, high energy and labor cost, expensive land, and incomplete supply chain. So rebuilding industries like steel, auto manufacturing would take enormous time and money. That would push prices up and eventually hurting US consumers and global investors alike. And in high-tech sectors like semiconductors on EVs, the US also lacks enough skilled labor to meet the demands of high-end manufacturing. In addition, the high instability and uncertainty because of the US the government's policies have also made many multinational enterprises to scare away from the long-term investment in the United States. So from any angle, this is not a good thing for United States or for any other country in the world. And to your questions about will there be a conflict? We don't know.
Wait. Before you get to that one, sorry to interrupt. Would China have done this 10 years ago? Like, it seems to be a difference now. Like, it seems to be a different China, where China is willing to say, we're not going to accept this. And I'm wondering, would they have done this, taken this action? Meaning, if you had a president that declared a trade war 10 years ago, would China have taken this position of, no, we're not going to accept your trade war in this sense?
I think it's really difficult to answer that hypothesis, because 10 years ago, if we look at the progress, the development progress of China 10 years ago, I think, first of all, that at that time, I don't think China was a threat for the United States, because we're still not that influential worldwide, and we don't have that high-tech breakthroughs. And the reason why we become a target for the United States is because that we are challenging the United States in many areas. Because how to say this, China actually, we are not responding because of that we want to be the top of the world, the leadership of the world. It's because that we have to, because the United States pushed us to this position. Like the trade war, we know there are no winners in the tariff war. Like any country drawn into such a confrontation, China inevitably suffers pain and losses too. But China knows Washington will attack, so it has spent years preparing for such a scenario. Ever since the first round of US tariffs attack during Trump's first term, that preparation has included a full set of countermeasures targeting US policies, supportive frameworks for Chinese enterprises, complete supply chains, and increasing sophisticated industrial planning aimed at diversifying the country's growth beyond exports. China is not caught off guard. That's the first key point. And also, answer to your question is not that we are preparing for that for nothing. That's the position we were pushed to. Second, I think why I don't think we will face a conflict in the near future, because I think public attitude in both countries are important to their to the government's policies. According to credible U.S. institutions such as Peterson Institute for International Economics, Harvard, and Yale, the tariffs would cost the U.S. economy up to $30 trillion US, with a 65% chance of a recession within the year, potentially leading to 2 million job losses. Prices for daily necessities are likely to rise sharply, placing a heavy burden on American households. I think this crisis, to a lot of Americans, they know this crisis is entirely avoidable. This will likely generate significant domestic backlash against Washington. And in contrast, while some Chinese exporters will indeed feel the pinch, one major pillar of China's preparation is targeted support for these businesses. Many have already begun, pivoting toward the domestic markets to meet local demand. And more importantly, China's population understands that it has been forced into such a confrontation, and there is a strong national unity and resolve to see this through. This kind of psychological readiness builds confidence, and such confidence is a key foundation for economic resilience. That's why, while the U.S. stock market has been sharp volatility. Right.
Yeah, it's been plummeting. Right.
China's markets has stabilized and are gradually rebounding after initial shock. So China still holds multiple cards. Well, I think Washington's toolbox looks increasingly empty. Beijing has not opted to sell off U.S. Treasury bonds, for example, a move that could seriously destabilize global markets. It has also not halted all rare earth exports to us, even though China controls the vast majority of global rare earth production. These powerful options remain on the table, just unused for now. So, I think China still hopes to leave room for cooperation and dialogue with the United States, but ultimately it's up to Washington, to decide whether to walk back or keep doubling down.
But I'm checking the time. Can I keep it just for a little bit longer? What deal could you work out with somebody who says stuff like this? He is effectively saying, we want China to regress. We want to put some kind of limits on China. That is his main objective. That is his goal. That is his only goal. Regardless of what is coming out of his mouth, his objective is, we feel that we no longer have an advantage over China in the way that we did, let's say, 20 years ago. And we need to somehow rebalance the economy for us to remain the hegemon. Okay, what deal can you work with somebody who is not looking for a win-win relationship? They're looking for a relationship where they dominate and you lose.
To be honest, this may sound difficult to accept from the US side, but if we consider the current global situation, especially the emerging global south, I think today what US thinks about how the relationship goes between United States with China or with other countries is not matter that much anymore. Let me take this opportunity to reflect on how the divergent visions of China and the United States are shaping the world.
Yeah.
China is pursuing of shared prosperity, and the United States today is American first approach. The question the question actually is, what kind of world will each bring about? And that's the questions a lot of countries are asking today. As the world slowly emerges from the shadow of pandemic and continues to struggle with low growth, inflation, and mounting debt, a fundamental question demands serious attention. Then who is driving the global economy forward and who is holding back? In the US government, aggressive use of tariffs has sparked widespread concern across the international community. WTO Director General God's Alejandro Ivela has warned all member states that Washington's such tariffs could shrink global merchandise trade by nearly 1% in 2025, a downward revision of nearly 4 percentage points from earlier forecast. The consequences of the US tariffs go far beyond numbers. Emerging economies are facing declining exports, currency depression, inflation spikes, growing deficit, disrupted supply chains, you just name it. And also in financial markets, we see greater volatility in stocks, bonds, and currencies. So for many developing countries, such shocks not only threaten their short-term stability or short-term planning, but may derail long-term economic transformation and industrial upgrading. For China, it's a big country. You have the power to, have enough tools to build a cushion from such the tariff hit, but not for all the countries. And even though many of these tariffs haven't yet taken effect, the damage is already being felt because the deeper cost lies in the collapse of trust. Trump's tariff has been rolled out globally with no credible justification, so leaving many countries to rethink the post-World War II world order, an order, ironically built under U.S. leadership. And so even including U.S. Alliances, they are asking, can the United States still be trusted? But in contrast, China is offering a different vision, one based on mutual respect, shared growth, and global cooperation. Multiple Southeast Asian countries have made clear their desire to deepen political trust with China, not just a trust, political trust, not because they want to take sides, but because Trump's tariff coercion is pushing even neutral countries closer to China, a partner, seen as a more reliable and constructive. China's idea of shared prosperity emphasized win-win cooperation and inclusive growth. This kind of message actually injected a strong certainty to what the world needs right now, especially in this era of uncertainty. So initiatives like Belt and Road don't just build roads and ports, they build bridges of opportunity and mutual development. So also under the RCEP framework, regional trade barriers are being lowered, supply chains are growing stronger, and economic opportunities are multiplying. At its core, this is a development philosophy that encourages resources sharing, complementary advantages, and global economic synergy. It offers not just an alternative model, but a sustainable model for many countries to choose. So the world needs right now is bridges, not walls. It needs cooperation, not zero-sum cooperation. I think China is not alone standing in front of the United States. I think there are increasing number of the world community. They are also asking the question, who is truly advancing global growth? Who is truly can help them to, have a prosperous future? The answer is becoming increasingly clear, and is also in the voices of markets, in the choices of nations around the world.
I'm glad you mentioned that. When it became clear that Donald Trump could not extricate himself from this trade war by himself, and that he couldn't win it on its own, like many of the U.S. couldn't just bully China in this way, he started going to other nations and started, which is funny, right? Because he's been browbeating these other nations. It's like he's been attacking Europe left and right, and yet he goes to them and say, hey, I need your help to gang up on China. Europe has said, we're not changing our relationship with China or damaging our relationship with China to make a deal with you. Japan has said, we're not damaging our relationship with China to make a deal with you. Many countries have effectively said, we are not damaging our relations with China in order to help you gang up on them. While China has been going all around the globe on this kind of, I guess, peace offensive to try to get other countries, Europe being one of them. Apparently, Europe is supposed to meet with, or the EU is supposed to go to China, I believe in May. I could be wrong, but I think it's May. As I pointed out, Japan says we're not changing our relationship. From your take, and I guess this could be the last question. There was one thing I wanted to hit you with, just out of a curiosity article that I found. Do you think China is going to be able to make inroads in typical countries that were, I don't want to say hostile, but that had, let's say, a closer relationship with the United States? Just for an example, right here. China, the EU is pulling tariffs, or not tariffs, I'm sorry, pulling sanctions off China in order to be able to make deals with China. Now, I think, if I'm not mistaken, this has something to do with the Uyghur thing that they effectively use as a battering ram to hit China. But the fact that Europe is now saying, well, yeah, we're strengthening our ties. We want to strengthen ties with China. What does that mean going forward? Does it make sense? Like, if China had a difficult time once before, for example, Huawei is a good example. When Britain wanted to use Huawei, the US puts pressure on it. It stops using Huawei. And you get Europe not wanting to bring in Chinese vehicles. But now they're in discussions about bringing those vehicles into Europe. And I would wager to you, maybe even bringing in something like Huawei or some other kind of electronics that they wouldn't have had when they had a closer relationship with the United States. So what do you see going forward with these other countries that the US has effectively broken ties with, the transatlantic relationship, for example?
I think, as I said earlier, is because it's not that China has no choice but to respond with countermeasures, but it's not a Chinese purpose to make confrontations or polarize the world into two sections.
Of course.
So China actually is open to all the cooperations and all the dialogues. There are over 190 countries in the world. If every one of them puts, national interest first above all else and blindly worships strength, the global order would collapse into a jungle rule, right? Where, might makes right. Power trumps, such principles.
And by the way, just to be clear, I want to make it, I'm not saying that China is trying to do this. I'm saying that you're forging relationships with the globe.
Yeah.
That's just a positive thing. But for the longest time, the US was working against those relationships, especially dealing with Europe, where they were like, you shouldn't deal with China, you shouldn't deal with, we wanted the relationship. We didn't want you to work with China. And I'm not saying that China is doing this aggressively. I'm saying more so that they're taking an opportunity to do something that they weren't able to do before with the US, now that the US is taking this provocative action through this tariff war.
Mm-hmm. I think from China's perspective, we have always expressed a genuine willingness to expectations to build a stable and constructive relationship with all the countries. So with the US tariff war against the world, so it's really about how other countries make their own choices. And China is open to that one. And China is also open to dialogues with the United States, because, to be honest, for China, the United States is still the biggest trading partner worldwide, and we still have a lot of cooperation can make. So I think, as I said earlier, the future of China-U.S. relations, the future of the stability of the world community depends on Washington today. If the U.S. can move away from pressure and coercion and instead embrace dialogue based on mutual respect, I think China's door to cooperation will always remain open, and the Pacific Ocean is vast enough to accommodate both China and the United States, as President Xi Jinping mentioned a couple of times earlier. So the world is wide enough to allow all nations to prosper together. And I think that's the value, the fundamental value of China's foreign policy today.
I want you to see this article, and this is the last question, I promise. I'm sorry I kept you longer than I intended. Great answers. We have a great audience that's here today, so this is fantastic. This article came out in South China Morning Post. It says China to waive retaliatory tariffs on some chips imports in sign of trade war thaw. And what the article is pointing out is that China has made a decision to, let's say, pull some of the tariffs quietly. They haven't announced it. And they even make a point of saying the government, the article's not available now. I read the article earlier. But they're even pointing out that when this information was effectively outed, that China kind of quieted even any level of reports on the fact that they were doing it. It was something that was listed on some kind of import registry that the news station saw and was like, hey, they seem to be dropping tariffs on these items. Do you know anything about this? I mean, there's been other reporting that has amplified this, but I'm not sure. And I'm wondering, is it because Donald Trump, does China see Donald Trump saying, well, we're going to pull back on some of the tariffs as a first step, meaning Trump blinked first, so we can take another step in this and allow the U.S. to make another step? Does it make sense? Like, is this communication without communication?
Yeah, I think we actually made that point in our earlier discussion as well. That is, I think why the United States is showing that it wants talks to China, and he want to cut off the tariffs on Chinese goods is because it has no cards to play, or is not that is running out of cards to play with China on this matter. And on the other hand, China actually still have a lot of cards to when facing such a confrontation or such hurdles. So I think you're right. I think the cutting tariffs on China, not because they suddenly, believe in free trade and they want to, refine their relationship with China, just because the economic cost of their policies is hitting Americans right now, and there are a lot of opposite voices within the United States, and also, as you mentioned earlier, the poll shows that the popularity of President Trump is dropping significantly.
And just to be clear, though, I just want to be clear. This is China doing this. China set to waive retaliatory tariffs on some U.S. chips imports in a trade war thaw, meaning they're saying China is the one who is, on this case, saying, okay, on some chip imports, we will remove tariffs. What I'm asking is this China's response to Donald Trump announcing that they're pulling back tariffs on China. Does it make sense? This is China doing this. This is not the U.S. doing it.
Yeah, I'm just getting there.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean
No
to.
problem. Sorry for not answering that
No.
question.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I'm saying is that because of that situation, the United States is running out of cards, and so the Trump administration is showing is trying to create an open window for China to talk or to have a backward decision on such policies. So I think China is responding very positively, and as I said earlier, for China, China-U.S. cooperation, if we look at back, China-U.S. economic relations are, fundamentally win-win, and we still want to. We actually already benefited a lot from that relationship, and we still think that should be the right way moving forward, to a win-win cooperation between China and the United States. So I think is some signal that maybe China is trying to send out that
I see.
it's okay. We are okay for we are also open for communication, and we are okay to talk about this.
Oh, very interesting. Anna, thank you for this. I sorry to keep you long.
No problem. I love to
I
talk with.
appreciated your answers. I really did. And I wanted someone on this specific issue. So I appreciate you joining me. Anna Ge, she is host and reporter at CGTN Radio, political commentator and regular contributor on China at mainstream media in South Africa, Sweden, India, Central America countries, or Central Asian countries, I'm sorry. And apparently on the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. Thank you for this. I really do appreciate it.
This issues affects us all, so I really appreciate platforms like this where we can discuss them openly. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
And we have a great crowd, so they kept growing as you were talking, so they definitely appreciate it. You have a good one. Thank you. Be safe.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
Bye-bye. Oh, she was fantastic. She was fantastic. I misunderstood. I initially thought she didn't understand the question. That's why I interrupted and tried to think, but she was getting to it. When I saw this article, my thought was, okay, well, is this communication without communication? Like, is this China effectively saying, okay, Trump, we heard you say that you are bringing back tariffs. You made the first move. You made the first step. We acknowledge that you made the first step. So we will now take a step in your direction by doing this. That's the way I took this. And so is this a thaw? I don't know if it's a thaw, considering the position and the thing that, U.S. ultimately wants, which is dominance. But it's apparently communication without communication. It's like hitting somebody with a rock, okay? That tells you how you feel, right? If somebody hits you. In this case, there seems to be, I don't know, a commiserate response. It's just interesting. Anna is fantastic. I deeply appreciate her for coming on the show. So that she's great. Absolutely.